You can kind of skip it, but just for this lecture, I'm going to go through this again. And then next class, I'll do it again. And then that's the last time I'm going to show it, but you have to do this every single class. Okay? So we're going to go through, and you're going to go to your documents. You're going to go into the Maya folder, and you're going to delete the 2014 folder. Okay, make sure you're deleting the 2014 from the Maya folder because that's where the preferences currently are. The old preferences, the ones we don't want. Then we're going to go into Documents, go into Our folder, find our 2014 folder, and copy it to that Maya folder. Okay, so I just Control-C, Control-V, and now I can open up Maya. Okay. If you don't open up Maya, or if you open up Maya first and then you try to do that, it's not going to work. Once Maya is open, those preferences are kind of locked where they're at. You have to close Maya down, delete the preferences, and then you can reopen it back up. And also, while we're waiting for this, I'll show you just a couple of these things. As we're going through and we're using some of these preferences, don't be afraid to actually go into these folders and just kind of hunt and peck around because they're pretty like self-explanatory once you understand the basics of them. One of the things inside the preferences in the preference folder is it has all of these files here. And they're all pretty much, if you open them up, they're pretty much like done in English. Okay, it just has to understand the context of it. So this window prefs.mel, if you right click it, this works on a Mac, works on a PC, and you open it up in any Word program like Notepad, Notepad++, text editor, WordPad, whatever. It opens it up into that kind of format. It's opening on my other screen. Let's cancel that. Come on. There we go. So this single preference right here is the location of every single window that we open up. So when we open up the outliner, Maya remembers you opened up the outliner and you moved it to this position on your screen. When you opened up the hypergraph, you moved it to this position on the screen. When you opened up the graph editor, you moved it to this position on the screen. Okay? So if for some reason you see that you're not getting those windows to show up, most likely what happens is, like on this computer, it has two screens. My laptop has one screen. So if I'm working on this computer, I drag a window over to this monitor, and then I save my preferences and I bring it home and I try to open up something, it may not show up because it's trying to put it all the way over here on this screen. Okay? So instead of me freaking out and not being able to do that part of the assignment, I can go into here, I can delete any one of these lines, I can save it. It's not any one of the lines, whichever one I'm looking for, you can see the names right here. Let's say outliner, so I can just delete the outliner line and then save it. And then when I reopen Maya, it will automatically default that to the default spot of it. Okay? I could also go in here and just delete out this single file, and Maya will recreate it, putting all these things back in the right spot. There's also the menu set preferences. Close that. User preferences, user hotkeys. Here's the shelves. So if we created a custom shelf, I could actually open this up. And here are all the custom shelf buttons that we created. Okay. Now again, this may not mean anything to you now, but just keep in mind that if something's not working, that sometimes you can kind of go through here and figure it out. Or if something's really not working, you can usually just go through and delete the preferences out of some of these. Okay. Like I could just go through and delete all these preferences, or delete that preference, or delete whatever one. Okay. So just be aware, you don't have to be afraid of these. It's pretty much, kind of like a text thing where you can just go in there and start playing around. One of the Maya formats, I'm going to show you this thing real quick. Oops. Let me just create a sphere, and then I'm going to save this. There's two Maya formats that we deal with. One of them is a Maya binary format. It's a .mb file. Okay, so if you're looking on your hard drive, you'll see a .mb. If you're on a PC, I don't know if a Mac shows it. But you can see the .mb here. The other one is a Maya ASCII file, and it's a .ma. So I'm just going to label this sphere. And I'm just going to open up that file through this. Default scenes. So here's that sphere. You can see one's named .ma and one's named .mb. The MB file is a binary file. If you speak computer, a binary is basically zeros and ones. Okay, we can't read binary files. Computers can read them. But the MA file is an ASCII file. ASCII means that it's basically text. So if I right-click and open this, you'll see that I can actually go through, and this is that file. Here's everything that's inside that file that we just created. Okay, now a lot of this may not make sense to you, but there's some things in here that we may need to use at some point in the future. For instance, they fixed it now, but in previous versions of Maya, if I'm working in 2014 and I wanted to open it up in 2012, you couldn't do that without going in here and just erasing all the 2014s and putting 2012. So then you were able to open it up. Okay, it'd be nice if programs like After Effects had stuff like that, but it just doesn't. All right, so it's kind of a neat thing. So just pay attention to, there's an MA and an MB format as well. Also on the resources drive, come on, there we go, 2510. In the resources 2510, this is where I'm going to be giving you anything that I'm going to be giving you locally. Okay, so if I do record a lecture, I typically put it out here so you can grab the actual video files. It's a lot easier than going to YouTube, but then you have to store the stuff on your hard drive, obviously. So like in lectures here, right now it's in the old folder, but here is everything that we're going to need for the desk. There's 6 lectures that are going to be associated with the desk of how to create everything from the very, very beginning pieces all the way to the very end pieces of it. Okay. But I also have in here, where is it? Texture resources. These things are images that we can use throughout our project. And right off the start of this, you're not going to really see, you know, how we're using it or why we're using it, but eventually you'll get the idea of why we would use some of this kind of stuff. So that if we have something like a background, and we really want to show, you know, this isn't just like blue sky, this is actually a sky, it has clouds, there's some sort of depth to it, we can bring a picture like this in and throw it way in the back, and then it gives the appearance that there's something in our environment besides a blue circle or blue sphere. Okay? And then depending on what kind of sky we want, you can see there's different pictures. And some of these are pretty big, that's why it's taking so long for them to load, not just because I'm going off the server. Okay, there's some pictures of grass, so if we wanted to, you know, grass, we could use the grass pictures. All right, so that's the textures area. And these things here were just grabbed from the internet. There's a website, we'll get more familiar with it as the semester goes on. But it's called cgtextures.com. And at some point, you'll need to create an account for it because you'll need to grab something off of it. cgtextures.com is a great resource for grabbing textures, grabbing reference images. Once it loads, come on, there it goes. You'll see how cool this information is. This here, like animals, let's say you needed reference for some sort of elephant. You can see how many different kinds of pictures they have of different kinds of elephants. There's 46 different head pictures that they have. So if I'm drawing an elephant, I can go here and grab a whole bunch of reference images. And usually these are pretty high quality images. Some of the ones you're going to grab off of Google are not really high quality. Okay? Usually they're ones from a zoo where someone's like a mile away and they grab this tiny picture of an elephant. Also, what we use these for, let me go to the body ones. Let's say that we've modeled an elephant, so we've created a cube and shaped it into the shape of an elephant. In order to get the texture of an elephant, we could take a picture like this and basically take this texture and paint it right onto the elephant. So that way he would have like the wrinkles and the coloring and the dirt and whatever else that this elephant would have. Okay, without having to go through and model that kind of stuff. There's also in here, like if I type in wood, you can't see it, but I typed in wood. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of wood pictures that we could use in here as well. I could also grab, here's medieval doors. Here are planks. Okay, so there's a huge resource here. Now you get a free account, free accounts. And the free account allows you to download 16 megabytes of imagery per day. Okay, So if you go here, I'm going to log into my account. It says 15, but you get 16. Let's say I needed a picture of brick, some cinder blocks, sure, and these brown ones. Okay, and then it gives me a bunch of different kinds of brown bricks that I can choose from. And once I find one, I can say, okay, I like this one. I click on it, and it brings me to even more selections of which ones I want. And then down here, which resolution I want. Okay, so we'll get more into what these things are and why we would pick a higher resolution over a lower resolution and when we want these kinds of things. But just keep in mind that this is one of those great resources, especially if you're getting into motion graphics and you want to do some After Effects stuff, or you have some graphic you're creating and you just want to find a cool texture for it. This is a great resource because they're also royalty free. So you can use them for commercial work or personal work or anything. If you go to Google and you grab an image off there, you have to be very careful you're not stealing someone else's work. Here, these are here for you to use for commercial work, for personal work. Okay, if I just go to Google and type in bricks, and I go here, and I say, that's a good picture of brick, and I grab it, okay, I'm stealing this picture of brick. Even though it might be the great picture, it might work for me, this is someone else's picture. This is someone else has created this and put it online. So I cannot use this legally. And if I was caught or found out that I used it, I could get into big trouble. Not the case with CG Textures. Okay? So I recommend you get an account. At some point, you'll need that. I also have on here the 3-year link. So there's the 3-year link if you need it. I also have, this is a toy room that we did a while ago. This is what we used to work on the entire semester. It was one big project that we kind of like built up to throughout the entire semester, and we modeled little pieces and put them in there. And then once this thing loads, I probably could have right-clicked. Oh well. And it's a little bit dark just because I have to add a color correction. To remember what program I'm in first. Exposure. Go. All right, so this was all the stuff that we used to create in the intro class. You're going to create stuff that's 10 times better than this, okay, in the same amount of time. I also have in here a full list of hotkeys. So I recommend that you go through, look at the list, and just double check your list just to make sure that everything that we've been talking about has been written down correctly. We're going to go through the last couple that I don't believe we touched on yet once this opens. Open with Reader. There we go. All right, so I believe the last couple that we don't have are on this side here. Well, whatever it is. We have the painting ones, which are up here, and then we have the transform snap and transform snap relative ones. Okay, so I'm just going to show you what these ones are. We won't really get into these until we get further into the assignments. So the first one here, the painting ones, I'm going to create a sphere. You don't need to do this, you can just watch. And if I wanted to take this sphere and have it act more like a piece of clay, where I'm pushing it and pulling it and able to kind of shape the way it looks, I can use a paintbrush inside of Maya that allows me to do that. Let me go and turn the light off so you can see it better. And you can turn the other lights on if you need to. Okay, so I'm going to go under Mesh, and I'm going to go to the Sculpt Geometry tool. And in here, this is called Artisan. Okay, and Artisan is used several spots inside Maya. This is one spot it's used to do that kind of clay sculpting, where right now all I have to do is click and drag, and you can see how I can push the pieces of this surface in. So if I'm trying to create, you know, whatever this is, I can do that very easily. Or what I can do is if I hold down the U key and click, this will pull up the operation menu, whether I'm pushing or pulling or pinching or smoothing or any of these things. So the one over here that I don't have written down, yeah I do, choose tool right there, is hold the U and then left mouse button click. So I'm holding the letter U and then holding the left mouse button, and then it allows me to pick which tool I want to get. And then you can write the other ones here too. Maximum displacement is holding M with the left mouse button. And then brush size is holding B with the left mouse button. I'll let you write those down real quick, and then we'll get back into Maya. And remember, these shortcut keys are not just for, we're taking a shortcut key test because that's what you do in a class that has lots of shortcut keys. You're taking these because these are things that are going to make your workload a lot quicker. By week 8, you should not be using any of the, the move tool things on the left or the rotate tools. It should all be done by the keyboard. As much stuff as you can do by the keyboard, the better off you're going to be. And if you've taken InDesign or Illustrator or any of the other programs, you've already kind of realized that. You've already gotten to that point where you're like, okay, I don't need to use the toolbox in Photoshop because I can just grab it. Okay, does everyone have those so far? Okay. All right, so holding U and then clicking allows me to pick which operation. Okay, so it pops open a new box called the marking menu, and then I can just drag, and then I'm pulling these pieces here. Okay. Now I can change the brush size. That's where the B one was. So I hold down B, and then I left click and drag, and I'm making this brush bigger or smaller. Let me do it in a little bit different situation. I'm going to create a polygon plane. Okay, I'm just scooting it up. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go and just make. See, very quickly I can get kind of like a grassy area. And I can say, oh, well, these pieces here are, intersecting, so I'm going to go and switch this to the smooth tool and just kind of smooth these out. So you don't have to be too concerned about knowing exactly what this tool is going to do yet. But when you get to it, you'll have the hotkeys that'll just make it a little bit easier to do. There we go. Okay, and then holding M allows me to choose my maximum displacement. Now, it's going to be a little bit hard to see. Let me switch to pull. You can see this arrow here. That's how much it's going to move when I click. So when I click, you can see it moves up that much. Okay, so I can hold down M, click and drag that down, and now it's only going to move up that much. All right, so there's tools for everything inside here. I could even control. Some of my menus went away. That's what I wanted. Toolbox. There we go. I could even control the shape of my brush. Right now, it's kind of like this. Hard in the center and then a little bit soft on the edges. I can make this a solid brush so it pulls up in a solid shape like that, or I can make it a square brush so it's pulling these square shapes off. It's harder to see on this because it's not very dense. I could also go into this folder here and wait. Typically it doesn't take this long, but I could go to an image of a black and white thing, kind of like Photoshop is, and grab a brush that looks like hair or looks like whatever, and I could put it on there, and then, it's not going to look like hair or anything, but it'll just give me that look. So if I had like scratches, a brush that had like scratches on it, then I could paint and it would give me that indentation of scratches. Maya's typically not this freezy. Sometimes it freezes, but not this much. I think it's this program. Let's close that.
It's cold out.
Yeah, it's cold out. It's too much snow in the computers.
Yep.
All right. And when in doubt, we'll just shut Maya down and restart it. Get used to doing that. All right, let's try that again. Plane. Make this bigger.
It's really cool.
There's something just bogging me down here. Nope. All right, let's go pull that up. Let's change these. All right, let's go back to the sculpt tool. There we go. Okay. So now, again, I can push this down, and I can switch to the pull, and I can pull it up. There's a bunch of different operations here, which eventually we'll get to. I could toggle the wireframe off. That's the wrong one. See, now I forgot it. Let me grab it. Some of these I just don't use very often because I don't use Artisan very often because there's other tools. There it is. Alt-A, that's what I hit. Alt-A, maybe I didn't hit it. Okay, so Alt-A will toggle the wireframe on and off, so sometimes it's hard to see what's going on here. So I can turn it off, paint my stuff on there. Ooh. There we go. And then hit Alt-A if I want to turn it back on. Okay, so that's a handy one to have. And then you could also use Alt-R, which is reflection. So if I wanted to paint something on both sides, I could paint something on both sides. And you can see how it's like mirroring what it's doing. Now I could also come in here with more options. These are just hotkeys, just like Photoshop. This has more options than the actual hotkey button does. So if I wanted to, I can come in here and play with a lot of these different things, choosing which direction I'm reflecting in. There we go, so I can go this way. And also from that menu here, when I hold down U, I can turn reflection on this way. I can also turn the reflection axis this way, and so on, okay? And I can also erase this stuff that I've done. So I can actually get this back to where I was. Okay, now that's one area that Artisan is being used, is by actually pushing and pulling the surface and smoothing it out, but it's also used for selection. So if I go under Edit, Quick Select Tool, or Paint Selection Tool, there it is, you'll see that I again get this brush. It's hard to see, Alt-A. Well, it's still going to be there. There you go, you can see it better now. I get this brush where now I can paint what I want to select. And then I can switch to U, and then say I want to unselect, and then I can unselect stuff. And then I can switch back to my Move tool, and then move those pieces up or do whatever I wanted with those pieces. Okay? So this is something that's going to be used several spots in here. All right? So Artisan is just one of those really, really cool tools. I could even use it. This is kind of like a fun one. Artisan really doesn't have a use for it in this case, except that that's the brush it goes to. But if you want to freeze Maya, that's the best tool to use apparently. City Mesh, there we go. So here's some buildings in here. These are just kind of come standard inside Maya. Oops. Bigger brush. There we go. So now I have a bunch of these little buildings. And then I can paint some more. And then paint some more. And then I can say, I want a skyscraper. And then add some skyscrapers. Or I can add a little town. Okay, but this is like the cheap way to do it. This is like it's kind of like using the leaf brush inside Photoshop. If you use the leaf brush in Photoshop and you go out and publish it, people are like, oh, that's a leaf brush from Photoshop. I know that. Okay, so you can't really use this for a whole lot of stuff, maybe background elements. But there's also, this is the creepy ones. They have flesh here, so here's fingers. So that's supposed to be a finger. Here's some skin. Here's a hairy arm. For whatever reason, they don't want to show up too good. Here's blood. The ones we do use are these flowery ones and the plant ones. We'll use those sparingly. There you go. So real quick, I can grab a little plant here and have that inside my scene. Just something quick. Okay. This thing here is called the visor, and it has paint effects, which is what I was just in, and it's an older thing. It really hasn't been updated terribly too much. It does have some cool things in there that you can use sparingly. But the visor also has these examples. So it has like ocean examples. This is something that's inside Maya called the Ocean Simulator or Fluid Simulator, where it allows you to create these kinds of simulations of what water would look like. Liquids are a terribly difficult thing to create or recreate in 3D just because of, if you think of it, it doesn't really have a volume to it. It's kind of like anamorphic, where it can change shape depending on what it's doing and what's hitting it and what's interacting with it. So this is one of those things that they have in here that allow you to kind of use some of these. So I can just middle drag this. And middle dragging in Maya is going to be a big thing. You'll see it used over and over and over again. And now I have this watery thing that if I hit play, you can see it's kind of moving. If I hit the render button and we wait, you can see here that we have what looks like a little bit of an ocean just by just kind of dragging it in there and putting it in. Okay, so it's Maya's not all drag and drop. This is just like the easy example things that are drag and drop. Here's some fluid stuff, which again is some difficult things to recreate inside 3D. Here's a nuke that I could just drag in. And then I hit the more frames here. Hit the play button, and we'll see this little nuke explode. And you can see how slow this is going. This is it calculating frame by frame because it's such a slow process for this kind of stuff to happen. If you think of a movie like 2012, where they were doing explosions and they had buildings falling down, they had smoke, and they had cars being ripped apart, you know, those things take hours just to figure out what they're doing. There you go. So we'll just stop it there so it doesn't take any more time. You can see all that smoke and fire and whatever else. And that was only 1 second that we watched of an animation. There's fluid initial states, which are just kind of like static things. There's hair examples. This is another thing that Maya can do, which is simulate hair. It might not seem like a huge thing, but it is. Just to have a character on your scene is one thing. It's very complex. But then to have all these individual strands of hair and to get them to interact correctly so that when a character turns around, her hair interacts with the wind in her shoulders and her face and everything else. It can be a tricky thing. Here's some toon examples. So here's some stuff that Maya can do too. It's not simply for creating, you know, photorealistic imagery. We can create stuff that looks more cartoony. And some of these are based on where the light's pointed. You can see how you can get this cool like halftone pattern. Some of these are just flat. Here's a pencil shading one. And this is all 3D stuff. And I don't know if you know it, but actually South Park is done inside of Maya. That's one of the, it's been done in Maya since the beginning of the show.
It looks so flat, too.
Right. Yeah. Or just how they do it. It's quicker to do it in there than the way they were doing it, which was cardboard pieces, cutting it out. This is end cloth, so this is where we're simulating actual cloth materials, okay? So instead of trying to figure out how a cloth moves and animating it with that, they basically create an actual shirt in 3D, give it the properties of it as far as like what the weight of the shirt is, what the friction is, what the stickiness is, and whatever else is. And then they have the character, when he moves, he's moving the clothing around. So it's kind of a neat thing. Here are some effects. So it's fireworks, so it's always exciting. Here's some end particle stuff. So this is more liquid simulation. Here's some IK stuff. This is, oops, let me get the gremlin. This is a character inside of Maya. So what we're looking at is, most likely he was started off with just a basic shape, just a cube, just a sphere, just a cylinder, whatever they started off with. And then from there, they go through and they push and pull, just like I was using with that sculpting tool, but a lot more than just, 2 seconds worth. And they create the shape of it. Now typically he looks like this as they're working on him. Okay? And if I look at his wireframe, you can see how dense his wireframe is. So it takes a lot of different wires and points and stuff to get to this level. And then they added this coloring. Now this is where CG textures would come in, because you don't have a gremlin texture. So you have to go to CG textures, you have to find something and say, I like the look of that metal, whatever it is. I want to use that as the skin on there. So sometimes you'll combine like a metal plus like a human skin texture or an elephant texture, put them together, and then you can create your gremlin texture. And then these little purpley things inside of him are the bones. So I can actually grab his bones here, and I can rotate these around to get the guy to move. And I can grab his neck and rotate that. And oops. I could also grab some of these. I'm just going to add some extra things in here. Skeleton is there. So I just want to move his legs. So I'm just adding this little tool. There we go. So now I can move his leg around. And I could do stuff like have him walk around the room if I wanted to. Okay? That's a bit more setup though. All right, so that again, that's just another example there. There's also a basketball player. He's really tall. There he is. And you can see here, there's the piece of geometry that's his skin. There's another piece of geometry that's his skin. And then this thing here, that would be the cloth that I was talking about. When we're doing like a cloth simulation, this would be kind of moving around. Now if I take this and hide it though, there we go. You'll see that he actually doesn't have an inner body. Okay. One of the things we worry about is kind of what do we see, what do we need, what don't we need. They don't need the inside of him because they're never going to see the inside of him, so they just don't model that kind of stuff. I'm not going to take his pants off. That'd be just creepy. All right. The same thing with the shoes. Here's some cool things. These are motion capture examples. And you might have seen these if you ever watched any behind-the-scenes footage where they take an actor, they put these like tennis ball things or golf ball things all over him. They have him run around a room. The computer takes that data of what he's doing or puts it in the computer, and then it basically creates that animation. So here is this one. And again, these things are huge, so I have to zoom out. Bless you. So now this guy's just walking, and then he sits down. Okay? Now these are not great reference or great tools for actually putting this in your scene, but they're great reference to just say, you know what, I want to create a scene where I know I have a character who I want to sit down at a desk. Well, here's a character sitting down, so if I take this character, put him at my desk, I can say, okay, do the proportions match? Is the chair height working with the desk height, working with the door height, working with everything else? We actually used this a few semesters ago. We did bathroom scenes in one of our advanced classes. So we brought this guy in, and no joke, he walked into the bathroom perfect. It wasn't set up perfectly, and sat down exactly where the toilet was. I don't know how it happened. It's just like one of those magical Maya things. Okay, so he walks in, and then he sits down there. Okay, and then there's also here's a dancing one. So just bring him in. You can see that they're not interacting. You saw that he just like hit them right there. Okay, because they're pieces of geometry, Maya's not calculating, you know, actual physical properties of these things. They're just points to Maya. So it doesn't care that they've intersected. That's a little longer. Okay, and then they also have these are ones that are what are called bound, where they have an actual piece of geometry. Then they have these other ones over here that are not. These are just skeletons. I'll go to the girl ones because those are better. Dance nightclub. All right. So now this blue little thing here, that's the motion capture data. Let me get rid of these two guys. There you go.
She's good.
Yeah. And the cool thing about this too is you can actually download motion capture data. So if you have a character that has this kind of setup, you could take that data and apply it to your character, and they would do those actions. But you have to have the right kind of proportions for it. Like I couldn't take a child, motion capture them, and apply their motion to an adult because their proportions are so much different than ours that it wouldn't work. Okay, I'll show you an example of what I did with a bunch of these guys. I think we did this last week too, where I had to go here. Start low now. Fine. That's odd. I don't think I took it down. It's a bad thing about having your name so close to sarcoma. Every time I search, I get sarcoma. Videos. Oh, because I had underscores in there. That's why. So this is just that same guy, and I just applied the same stuff to it. It's just a silly thing that, you know, when the Harlem Shake came out, I'm like, oh, that'd be kind of neat. Yeah. And then you do it. I had another one where I had a disco ball, and I had these lights in there, and that just took forever to render, and I was kind of over it, so. I'll show that one too, just because we're already there. Those are my kids and my dog. Yeah, I call it my 5-minute Harlem Shake. My brother did one. His took like all day long because he was using Premiere and I was using After Effects, and he was having issues.
What's Premiere?
It's video editing, but it's more of like linear or non-linear editing. After Effects, if you used After Effects, is not for video editing. It's for special effects, okay, or for motion graphics. Premiere is for, I have a bunch of video, I want to put it together in some sort of sequence. And if I had something inside of Premiere that I'm like, oh, I want to add some cool graphic here, I could take that clip out of Premiere, bring it in After Effects and do it, and then drop it back in. Maybe next week I'll show you an example of that in there. All right, so back to my original stuff. Alt-A, Alt-R, we got that. And then these snapping things, transform snap is J, and then transform snap relative is hold Shift and J. Cylinder. Okay, so I have a cylinder here, and I want to rotate this cylinder. So if I grab the blue, remember we don't grab this outer yellow one at all, because that will spin all three of these around. We only grab the green, the red, or the blue, but never the outer one. If I click on blue, you see that that one now becomes like a lighter blue, but we can click on this. So let's pretend that I wanted to rotate this perfectly 90 degrees, okay? I could go over here into the channel box and type in 90, but that's a lot of work. So what I can do is I can hold J. As I drag this around, you can see how it's like snapping to these little intervals, okay? So that's what J is going to do, is snap the rotation or snap the movements in increments. Oops. So transform snap is to hold the J key as you rotate stuff around. Now, as a experiment, I don't think it's going to work in the other ones. Yeah, it'll also work with the other tools, but it's kind of not as useful, I think, as the other ones. Maybe going this way it probably is, that way it is. But scale definitely doesn't seem like it. All right, now the other one is, let's say I've rotated it like this. Well, let me zero that out again. Let me say I've rotated it like this, and then from here, I want to rotate it 90 degrees down. Then I can still hold the J, or hold down Shift and J, and then drag this down, and it'll snap it 90-degree increments from there. So it's not snapping it to 45 or 15 degrees, it's snapping it into these other ones. So if I hold J, you see how it snaps it to even numbers. Hold Shift J, and it's going to snap it just kind of like from that point over, okay? And that's just called relative. Snap, transform relative, hold Shift plus J. I typically never use this one, but this one I use a whole lot, this transform snap. All right, so I think that's all of them that's on your list, right? Is there anything that I missed? No? Okay, cool. All right, so if you haven't booted Maya up, boot Maya up. Okay, so remember we did this Pacman folder with this day one playing folder. For some reason, mine's not going into the correct spot. If yours is going in the correct spot, where you would see in this area where it says location, it says your name in that location area. You don't have to worry about this that part. But I'm going to click on New, and I'm going to call this one Desk. Okay, so we're going to set up the Desk folder right now for that one. Under Location, we're going to click on the folder and go find that folder on our D drive under My Name, W14 2510 Work. Okay. The location should be your name. right there. Yep.
What is it?
Okay, so it should say D:\\, whatever your name is, \W14, \2510, \work. Okay, so every time we create a new project, we have to make sure we come in here and we set this to say our current project name is going to be this and our location is going to be that. That's every time we're working on a brand new project. A project is defined as, today I'm working on Shrek, so I have a Shrek project folder. Tomorrow I'm working on Toy Story. I have a Toy Story folder. Okay? That way Maya knows which project I'm working on. It can bounce back and forth. We're going to be working on Pac-Man today. I'm just setting up the desk one just so you can go through the process of setting your project to what we're going to be working on. Okay? I've also included my last name and underscore my last name in the project name. That way, as I go through and I'm trying to figure out where my stuff is, again, I just search for my last name and I can find that stuff. So make sure that as you're naming your projects, you have your last name somewhere in there, okay? Once we have the project named, once we have our D:, whatever, all the way to work, we hit accept. And now our project folder has been created, okay? Then we can go to File, Set Project. Okay, and now this should take us to this area where we have our projects listed. So in mine, I have 3 of them. I have Day 1 Playing, I have Desk Sarcona, and I have Pacman Sarcona.
Oh, my Day 1 isn't in here.
All right, so we have our different project folders here. So every single time you come into Maya, every single time you come into this class, or if your Maya crashes or anything happens where Maya just closes down automatically, or you have to close Maya, go through and go to File, Set Project, okay? This is the biggest area that's going to screw you up if you don't do this every single time. Because if Maya doesn't know what you're working on, it's going to assume things, and then that's where stuff gets messed up. So we go to File, Set Project, and then we click on the project name of whatever we're working on. So right now we're going to work on Pac-Man. So I'm going to click on the word Pac-Man. I'm not going to go into the folder. I'm just going to click on the word Pac-Man and then hit Set. Okay? So now what should happen is if I go to File, Save As, let's go to File, Save As. You'll see at the very top of our scene where it says D:, blah, 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 Pacman _ Sarcona /scenes. Okay? Does anyone's not say Pac-Man in that top area? Good. All right, so now in the bottom area of this, you may already have a Pac-Man started. We're just going to call this new Pac-Man. So new Pac-Man _ your last name _ 01. And then just hit Save As. Okay? That way we know what our stuff is. All right, so now a scene inside Maya consists of all the objects that we're going to be building. Okay? It's basically geometry, and then any lights that we're going to create, any cameras we're going to do, any animations we're going to do. It's kind of like the After Effects project. All right, that's if you want to associate it with something, that's the After Effects project. Or if you're working with InDesign, it's like your InDesign project where you're kind of like bringing everything together. So what we're going to do is we're going to create, go to the Create menu, or remember the hot box, we can hold the spacebar down and go to Create NURBS Primitives Sphere. Okay, create NURBS primitive sphere. Now we're using a NURBS primitive sphere for one reason. The reason being that we can take this sphere that's a solid sphere and we can open it up. Okay, because this is Pac-Man, so Pac-Man has to have that kind of Pac-Man-y shape. So here's that sphere. Remember, we can hit what key to make it shaded? 5. And what key to get closer to him without zooming in automatically? To frame him? F. Yes. Okay. So if we look at our Pac-Man guy right here, you'll see that he has a thicker line. If you look at all those lines going around, those are called isoparms. And that thicker line going right down the middle is that seam. when we did our Lego last week, some of you used a NURBS cube, some of you used a polygon cube. And one of the differences we found was that the NURBS cube is actually 6 individual pieces, where a polygon cube is 1 piece. This guy here is 1 piece, but those 2 pieces kind of just come together and touch, and it looks like they're connected, but they're really not. Okay, so it's actually right here is open, but it looks like it's shut. All right, so we're going to open that up. But we of course need to take our Pac-Man and rotate him sideways, because otherwise he's like laying on the side of his head. All right, if you look at it like this, that's his mouth. So we need to take Pac-Man and just rotate him. So we're going to go to the rotate tool, which is E. Okay, and then we're going to hold down J, and we're going to click on just the red. Okay, so we want to rotate it just in the one direction, so we're going to click on the red and rotate until he looks like he's at 90 degrees.
Holding down the J key?
Mm-hmm. Holding on the J key and rotating. Just the red. Okay, it might take some getting used to using this kind of rotate, because it's not like any rotate tool that you've probably used inside of any of the other Adobe products or anything else ever anywhere. So we should see in our channel box, this little box on the right, that we have 0, 0, 0, 90 for the rotate X, 0, 0. So if you don't have that, you can just go over there and type it in. Okay, so you can rotate, obviously, that's an easy way to do it. But going over here and just typing in where it says 90 right there, that's an easy way just to make sure that, again, we're accurate. We're making sure it's rotated perfectly to 90. In InDesign, it doesn't really matter. I don't think you ever touched that where you're like, oh, I need this to be exactly at 0.5, and then you've cared after that. You know, once you kind of put it there, you just like, there it is at 0.5. Well, here, we're always caring about where things are positioned because it's a 3D space. One thing you're going to find inside Maya too is that if I simply go over here, and what happened over here was that she zeroed her scales out. You'll see that right now the scales are at 1. Let me just get rid of this. The scales are at 1. If I take these to 0, he goes away. If the scales are at 0, it's scaled to nothing. It's gone. Okay? So we can type in 1 for these. And you'll see how I typed 1 here, and he didn't come back yet. I have to hit enter in order for Maya to say, okay, I see what you're talking about. All right? So just be aware of that. And also be aware that when I hit enter, you'll see that the cursor is flashing in here still. So if I were to come over to here, and I'm like, oh, I need to go into wireframe. What's wireframe's hotkey? 4. So I type 4. It doesn't go into wireframe. I hit 4. And I keep hitting 4, you can see what I'm doing. I'm typing 4 over here, okay? So just be careful that as you click, sometimes we're doing this kind of stuff. And it's not anything that you'll ever kind of grow out of. It's just something you'll do. Now, if you want to make sure you never do that, there's 2 enter keys. There's an enter key on your regular keyboard, and then there's an enter key by your numeric keypad. Watch the difference. I type in 1, and I hit the numeric keypad. My cursor is still flashing there. I hit 1, I type enter on the other one, and you'll see that it accepts it. And so now if I come over here and hit 4, it'll work. Okay? So there is a difference even between the enter keys inside Maya as to which one does what. All right? So just be aware of that. And I think we could even go, nope, never mind. I thought we might be able to hit Control Shift or something. No. So that's it. All right. So 90 for the rotate X. Now let's move him up so that he's flat. Again, it doesn't matter if he's actually flat on the ground. It's just something that bothers me that he's not flat on the ground. So we're going to go to the Move tool, which is, what's the hotkey? W. And we can hold down what to make sure it snaps? J. Okay, and we grab just that one arrow. We want to move it just straight up. So you hold down J, click and drag on that arrow, and he pops up right on top of the grid. Okay, so this movement, the translates in the channel box should be 0, 1, 0. Okay, just the translate X, translate Y, and translate Z. We moved him 1 unit up in the Y direction, so that's where we're getting that 1 from. Everyone's good so far?
No.
Who's not? this may happen to several of you, it happened last semester to several people, is that because we're working in 3D, there actually is like a world up. Okay, there is a spot where it's like, okay, here's the actual ground, and then this is where the sky is, and then this is where, in biblical, that's where hell would be, right? Below us. So if I'm like this, and I move this up like this, okay, he's still on the ground plane, but the world is actually flipped. So that now as I move this in the negative direction, he's moving up, which doesn't make sense, okay? So just be aware of that. And if you look at this little icon down here in the bottom left, that's your indicator as to where your up is. So Y should always be in the top of that. So I always want to rotate that around so Y is up there. And then that's there. Okay. All right, so now that's there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to, open up Pac-Man's mouth. Now the way we do this is we're using what are called inputs, okay? Pac-Man, the sphere was created with certain parameters that went along with it. How big is this sphere? How big is the radius of it? How big is the height of it? And so on, okay? So if we come over here to the channel box, you'll see that there's a thing called Make NURBS Sphere 1. Does everyone see that? Yes. Okay, we're going to click on it. Yours does. You just have to scroll down.
Oh.
Okay. And then here are those parameters of what it looks like or what it was created with. And you'll see that one of these options is radius. Okay, we don't need to touch radius, but I'm just going to show you that just by changing this, it's going to change the size of that. Okay, so all these values are kind of feeding into what this sphere looks like. So if I want to change something like opening and closing Pac-Man's mouth, I know that using the start sweep and the end sweep are the two options I need to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my start sweep, and I'm going to change this to 45. Okay, so change your start sweep to 45. Now, 45 is just a magical number that I picked. It has nothing to do with the actual degrees of how big Pac-Man's mouth opens. It just looks like a good number, so I picked 45. Okay. Now, because I went with 45 on the start sweep, what do I want to go with on the end sweep?
45.
What was it? 315. Because it'd be 360 minus 45. Okay. If I went with 45 on the start and end sweep, he would be gone. Okay. Oops. So 45 is our start sweep, 315 is our end sweep. You'll also notice that there's a degree where it says cubic. You don't need to touch this, but I'm just going to show you if I change this to linear, that he now becomes like a blocky version of Pac-Man. If I change it to cubic, he's back to being rounded. Okay. When we talk about polygons, we talk about NURBS. This is more of what a polygon would look like, is this blocky looking thing. But with NURBS, we can go to cubic and we get this nice looking smooth thing. We also have sections. Yes, sir?
Does the start always, how do we know where the start begins?
You don't.
Oh, all right.
We just kind of, if it's in the wrong spot, then we rotate the thing around or whatever. If we had rotated at negative 90, okay, so he was like this and we flattened him out, the start sweep went down this way, right? Right. So if we went the other way, then the start sweep would have been up here. Okay, so it doesn't really matter as long as we know where those two options are. If we go to sections and I punch in like 30 here, you can see how I'm adding more divisions to this Pac-Man. If I go back to 8, which is the default, if I go to spans and I type in 30, it's going to go the other direction. Okay. So you can see how I can get a very, very dense mesh on here if I needed a very dense mesh, but I don't, so I'm just going to go back to the defaults. I could also change my height ratio, which in this case is not really going to do anything. All right, I don't know why they even have that. Okay, so now that we have his mouth open, we want his mouth to open and close like Pac-Man would, because it's not Pac-Man unless he's opening and closing his mouth. So we're going to animate Pac-Man opening and closing his mouth. All right, the first thing we need to do, if you click on him, you'll get your stuff back. The first thing we need to do is add more frames. Right now we're at 48, or if you look at this number here, we're at 24 in our working area, 48 in our entire timeline. Okay, so this is basically frames. This is not seconds. So this is actually 24 frames in 1 second. 2 seconds is how long this is. So we're going to take this this 24 here and change that to 120. Okay, By changing the 24 to 120, we're getting about 5 seconds worth of animation. 120 divided by 24 is 5. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're just going to animate Pacman's mouth opening and closing, opening and closing. Okay? Now again, we want to do this in the most efficient way possible. But for this one, we're just going to kind of do it the blunt force way, where we're just kind of like hammering it along. Okay? We'll get more efficient as we go. But sometimes you have to know the long way, so the efficient way makes more sense. So we have to set keyframes on these two attributes here. Okay? So notice how I can click on one and drag to the next one, and it highlights their names. So click and drag on those two attributes, start sweep and end sweep, so that they're highlighted or highlit. And then you're going to right click, and on the nearest to the top it says key selected. If I right click and do the key selected on this, you'll see how they're no longer this like dark color, they're this like salmon-y color. Okay? Again, Maya is color coding these things to make it appear that something is going on. Again, right click on it again and go to unlock select. You accidentally went to make non-keyable, so it wasn't letting you set keys. So now it's one thing you'll find in Maya, it's very easy to kind of make one tiny mistake, and then that kind of like is your downfall. Okay. So we set a key here. So the way it works is in After Effects, if you have your first keyframe set, you click the stopwatch, then all you do is you advance your time, change it, and it automatically does that. It does not do that in Maya. Okay, it can do it, but we don't want to do that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go up to, let's say, let's say 15. Okay, I don't want his mouse to move too much. So we're just going to click in our timeline until we get to 15. You can see where it says 15 here. You can see on the far right where it says 15 right there. Okay, and then we're going to close his mouth. So we're going to just put those back to 0 and 360. And then again, highlight the names, right click, and key selected. So again, most of the stuff I do is pretty lazy, so I don't want to have to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the graph editor. So we have our stuff still selected. We're going to click on the graph editor button, the GE, in our shelf. And that's going to pop open the graph editor. And then we can frame stuff in here using our framing button, which is, what's that? F? Yes. Okay. So if we hit F, we're seeing the curves. Okay. We don't need to really care what they're doing right now. All we have to know is that this is our animation. This top one is one of them. This bottom one is another. So we're just going to marquee these two things. And then we're going to go to curves, post infinity, oscillate. All right, sorry for the interruption. Okay, so we were at oscillating. So based on just the menu we went to here, curves, these are obviously the curves. If you've used Illustrator or InDesign, Photoshop, any of those programs, those look exactly like those kinds of curves you would see there. In this case, we're dealing with animation curves. Same kind of thing. So the next menu we went to was post infinity. So what does post mean? After. And what does infinity mean? Forever. So after forever, these curves here, what it's going to do is what we went to, which is oscillate. And what does that mean? Back and forth, right? So it's back and forth. So basically his mouth's going to, it's open right now, so it's going to close. That's going to go back to open, close, back to open forever. That's what it should do, okay? So if we break down a lot of these into what their meanings are, it makes it a lot easier. Some of these things, like if I just went to curves and I said mute, what does mute do?
Turn the sound off.
Turns the sound off. But it also turns something off, right? So if we muted one of these channels, it basically turns that channel off. So if I'm dealing with this crazy complex animation and I want to just focus on one thing, I can mute everything except for that one thing and just focus on just that one thing. Okay? So some of these are just kind of like go to it, see what it does, undo it. There's usually like mute, unmute, template, untemplate, pin, unpin. All right, so we can close the graph editor. And then now if we hit the play button down here on your VCR controls, we should see Pacman's mouth opening and closing. Wonderful. Okay. Now that saves us a load of time having to go through and not have to do the other thing. All right, so now we have Pacman's mouth opening and closing. But now what we want him to do is, if you look at him, he's very flat. You can see his mouth just kind of opens and closes. And yeah, this could kind of pass for like a 1980s Pac-Man, but this is 3D. We want to have some cool 3D graphics in here. Speaking of 3D graphics real quick, if you watch the Grammys, I don't need to see the picture of it, but the Grammys graphics were like pretty bad, like their title graphics. It was basically like block text just kind of like popping in and stuff. Just my gripe. So let's take this and make this a little bit more 3D. So we're going to hold the space bar down while we have Pac-Man selected. And in this middle one where we have this like shorter menu, it says Edit NURBS. We're going to go there because it's the NURBS surface. And, oh, you can hit the stop button. Sorry, hit the stop button or escape button and Pac-Man will stop moving. Then you can go to Edit NURBS. And then we're going to go to the offset surfaces, which is down here. And we're going to go to the option box.
Where's that at?
Right in the middle-ish. See where it says Edit Curve Surfaces?
Yeah. Oh, there it is.
Edit NURBS. And then Offset Surface, and we're going to go to this option box right here. Offset Surfaces, and then just click or let go on the box. Okay, so we have the box open. Okay, so this is an option box, and you'll see that many items inside Maya have this little box on the far right. It might take some getting used to going to that box, because usually we're used to a box popping up automatically. Okay, so it's just going to take some getting used to, like actually going to the box. The box has typically like default settings. So if we had, like, say 100 surfaces that we want to do the same exact settings to, we set it for one, and then we can just use this box to just apply it to all of them. Okay. So what this is going to do is it basically has an offset distance, and it has a fitting method. Okay. So depending on what kind of surface we have, we may have different things or worse things that we want to use with these types of things. All right. So I just wanted you to see the box, but everything in here we can also change after the fact. Okay. So I just wanted you to see the box. So make sure your Pac-Man is clicked, and then you can hit offset.
I don't know if my
It is.
Okay.
Okay. So what we're getting now.
Oh.
Okay. So what we have here is he's taken the original Pac-Man surface and it offsets it. So it creates a duplicate and scales it up. Okay. It's essentially what it did. But what we want to do is this one, you'll see, he's like below the ground. So we could move both of them up and tweak it and whatever else. But it's much easier to say, okay, instead of offsetting it outward, we want to offset it inward. Okay. So if you look over here in the channel box, you remember how we had the NURB surface, the NURB sphere. It had options of opening and closing the mouth. Well, this one, because it was done using an offset surface, its options are the offset surface options. So where we had that 1 as the distance inside the box, we have the 1 right here. So we're going to make this a negative 0.1. Okay, so just type in negative 0.1 for that distance. And what that does is it offsets it negatively inside the mouth, 0.1 units. Okay, and you'll see that now he's on the inside of it. And you don't need to hit play, but I'm going to hit play just so you can see. But both objects are working. Okay, this is what's called history. When one object is created, it has history to it. So all of those things that we did with the make NURB sphere, where we use this end sweep and the start sweep to open and close the mouth, That's part of the history. That's part of what made the surface do what it was doing. Then we took that surface and we offset it. So now every single frame is recalculating the start and end sweep and then offsetting it in so that we get this same animation. Okay? So I'm going to go to a frame where the mouth is open the most. So I'm just going to go to wherever it seems like it's open the most and stop there. Okay? So we have to do a little bit of work on the inside of his mouth. You can also hit F if you're zoomed out. Okay? Now, if you look closely here, we've offset it, but there's no thickness. Okay? There's a thickness, but it's like paper thin on both sides. We have to fill this gap here so that Pacman is solid and not just like two pieces of paper. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab both Pacman pieces. So I just marqueed both, click and drag over them. And we need to grab the edges, like the lip edges of both pieces, and fill that area in. So we're going to hit the F8 key, the function 8 key on the keyboard. Okay, that's going to turn the points on. Okay, we don't want the points on Pacman. So we're going to go up to the top, and you can see here where I have this square. And I click the square off, the points go away. And then I'm going to go down and click the lines on, and now the lines will be activated. So I'm just going to click on one, shift click the other. Okay, click on one, shift click the other. Okay, you may have to zoom in, you may have to spin your camera around a little bit just to make sure you select them. Okay, and if you accidentally select something wrong, you can always click off and then click back on there. So once we have these selected, we're going to the hot box. We're going to surfaces right in the middle-ish. And then we're going to go down to loft and then just let go on loft. Okay? And you'll see what loft does under surfaces loft. Loft is going to fill the gap. It takes one curve, it takes another curve, and it fills the gap in between those two curves. Okay? So now we're going to marquee the two Pacman again. Make sure you don't grab the piece. So watch as I marquee just the bottom bits. And then I do that same process to grab these two pieces and then loft again. Okay, so now that we have these two pieces here, we can hit F8 again to get back to object mode. And if you look at the top of your screen, right here under the word mesh, there's these three icons. As you hit F8, it takes us to component mode. Hit F8 again, takes us back to object mode. Okay? So make sure that yours is in this middle mode, this object mode right here. Okay? It'll even say right here, here's the word components, there's the word objects. Okay. You want to be in object mode. Okay? And remember, if it's not showing, it just may be collapsed like this. You can see how I can collapse all of these and expand all of these to get more options. And now if we were to hit play again, you'll see that not only is the offset moving along with it, but now these new pieces are also moving along with it. Okay? So because of history, Maya's actually remembering, what did we do first? We created a sphere. We animated the start and the end sweep. We offset that sphere. We grabbed these two curves and lofted them. We grabbed these two curves and lofted them. It remembers everything that we've done. Okay? And it's recalculating everything we've done every single frame. All right? So if I were to, just to show you, I could actually get rid of that. If I go here and I delete the history, that's what this history button does. We created this history button next to the center pivot. If I delete the history and then I hit play, you'll see that he doesn't move at all. Okay? Because all that information that we're using to calculate this stuff, we've wiped that information away. Okay? So for most things that we're going to be doing, it's fine to delete the history, but there's some things that we need to do it at a certain time. Okay? If you're modeling a character or you're modeling a piece, it's typically fine to delete the history like every 5 minutes or every minute. Okay? Sometimes you do it every day. It all depends on how much history you have there. And you'll see over here how things are going to start to pile up, where we have the loft right there, this one, the original one, we have the make NURB sphere, we have the loft, we have the loft, we have the offset. So you can see where it's remembering all this stuff. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to animate Pac-Man moving from one side of the screen to the other side of the screen. Okay, now you might be thinking that what we can do is grab all this stuff and move all this stuff. But you'll see that as I start to move all this stuff, that it just breaks. Okay? Now the reason it's breaking is because, again, history. Maya's trying to remember everything that we did. So when we told it, I have this surface and I want you to offset it. Well, now I'm taking this surface and I'm pulling it back. And then I'm taking that original surface and also pulling that back. And then I'm taking these lofts and also pulling them back. So that's where it's getting confused, is because it doesn't know exactly what I want it to do. So it's kind of like freaking out. All right? So as we move it back, we want to grab just the outside one, just our original Pac-Man one, and move that back to, in the translate x, negative 12. Okay, so now we have Pac-Man all the way at negative 12 in the x direction. We want Pac-Man to simply move from negative 12 over to positive 12. So what we're going to do is right-click on, or first, reset our time back to frame 1. Okay, so just click and drag down here, or you can type in 1 right there. However you get to frame 1. Then we're going to right-click on Translate X and key selected. Okay, and again, this should turn a salmon color, indicating that we have a keyframe selected, or a keyframe there. Click off of it just to make sure.
Mine's not.
There it is. Okay. Right click and go to key selected. Okay. And then we're going to go to frame 120. Change this to a positive 12. And then right click on Translate X and key selected. And then if you hit play, you should see Pac-Man chomping away down our grid. Okay. So now we've basically, the animation part of this is done. Okay, we've modeled and we've animated. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to light our Pac-Man up. Now in order for us to have this look more, it's not going to look realistic, but look more realistic and less CG, we want to put a ground plane in here. Okay, and the ground plane, just like in the real world, it shouldn't just stop. Like we could put like a cardboard piece on the ground and we would be able to see the edges. We don't want that. We want to create this enormous ground. So I don't care which one you go to. You can do NURBS or polygons, but we're going to do a plane, and we're going to scale it up until it's like enormous. Oops, there it goes. You lost my screen. So create NURBS plane or create polygon plane and just scale it up. And my scale is like, I'm going to put them all at 1,000. That's how big I want this plane to be. Okay, so now we have our Pac-Man and we have our little ground plane. We're going to add a light to our scene. Now there's a couple different lights that we could use for this. We're going to use one that's a spotlight. The spotlight works like a real spotlight works, in that we have basically like a single dot that we're emitting from, and then we have this like fanning that the spotlight's going to shoot out of. Okay, so that cone angle we're going to play with to get it to fit our scene. Now we want to get this so that Pac-Man is going from left of the screen to the right of the screen. Okay, so we don't want to be over here because now he's going away from the screen. We don't want to be up here or anything like that. So as we do our lighting, we're going to light this from this side so that Pac-Man is going from there. So we want to make sure that he's going from left to right, because that makes more sense. So we're going to go to Create, Lights, Spotlight. Okay, and we can scale this thing up. The scale has no effect on the actual light itself. It just allows us to see it better. That's all it does. Okay, so I just went to Scale, which was R, and scaled it up. Okay, so we have this big spotlight. Then we're going to hit the T key. Okay, the T key allows us to have two arrows. Okay, this first arrow here, which is at the origin, is the one we're going to move. The other arrow will move in a minute, okay? But watch what mine does before you move yours. As I grab this lefter arrow, the one that's closer to these two black lines here, closer to the point where it comes from, and I move it up, you can see that as I move it, this is moving the light. The other one is just going to move what it's pointing at, okay? So my point at should be pointed at the origin, and my pointed to, or from, should be way over here, okay? So I'm going to show you how I have mine set up, and then I want you to set yours up kind of like that as well. Okay? Doesn't have to be exact, but just kind of. Okay, now I can't see them on mine too good, so I'm going to condense some of my menus up here on top. So I'm just going to condense some of these so that I can get to these buttons right here. These are my rendering buttons. So if you need to, condense, work around your stuff until you can see your rendering buttons. And then we're just going to hit this render button. There's a clapper without any text on it, without any dots, without any blue background. We're going to click on that one.
Render which one?
You got your over here, set your translate to yeah. And you can do the back on planes. No. Something drag from the back to the rotate. And then this one right here. Okay, and then change your scales here to 1,000. There we go. Okay, and then you're gonna. Yep. Okay, so this is our rendering. So this is what it's going to look like when we're actually rendering this thing out. Just scale. Hit R. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and then you scale it up. But you can also move it up. You move it up, and then the cone will be bigger because you're hitting it through that way. A little bit more this way. We want to shoot. All right, if you can't see him too close, you may want to zoom in a little bit. Some of these look like they're really too far away. There you go. Now we can notice a few things in here that are really kind of screaming CG. One of them is the fact that there's no drop off on this cone. Okay, it's perfectly a hard line, and in order for this light to be this sharp, that cone would have to be literally like right up against it. Because even this light, you can see there's no like defined line here. It just kind of like comes up and fades out, right? That's what a light does. Also, the intensity here and the intensity here is pretty much the same thing. All right, so it's a pretty like evenly lit cone angle right now. So it totally screams CG. Now we're not going to go photoreal, but there's stuff that we can do to kind of help it be better. Okay, so we're going to close the render view, which is this button here to close it. And then we're going to go into the attribute editor. And the attribute editor has all the options for our light. So we hit, what's the attribute editor is a hotkey. Control A. Very good. And this is all the stuff that we can use to control the light. So make sure you have the light selected, and then you'll be able to see the light's attribute editor. Okay? So click the light, Control A, or if you just click on an object, it'll automatically reload it into the attribute editor. So we have things like the color. What color is the light? We have stuff like the intensity of the light. We also have, this is the light shape. This is kind of like a preview, just so you don't have to actually click the render button. You can see what it's looking like. Here we go, cone angle. So let's take our cone angle up higher. All right. So let's double it to 80.
So we click on the green, the light?
No, just click on the light like you had it. There you go. And then scroll down so you can see cone angle. And then that's just going to make the cone angle bigger, okay? So if we want our light starting from this one spot and we want to just spread it out, that's what it's going to do. The penumbra angle we're going to put up to 10. Okay? And looking at the little icon of what the light shape is going to look like, you'll see that instead of having that hard edge, we're actually going to have a soft edge on there now. Okay? You don't need to hit the render button, but I'm going to hit it just so you can see what the render view looks like after we've done that. Okay? So the edge is a bit softer. we still have a pretty, it's harder to see on the projector, a pretty evenly lit light right here. So we're going to drop it off, okay? One of the things that's also kind of weird is the intensity is a lot brighter here than it is there. If this is a true spotlight, there would be some shift here, but realistically there'd be a huge shift from the center of this where the light is created outward, right? So the hottest spot should be in the center, not necessarily on the outside. So that's where this drop-off comes in. The drop-off we're going to put to 5. Okay? These values are just kind of like starter values. I can go in afterwards and say, you know what, I need a little bit less here, a little bit more here, and tweak it. All right, so we changed cone angle to 80, penumbra angle to 10, and drop off to 5, and then we hit the render button. Okay? And now we get the rendering that looks a lot better than it did before. This looks a lot more realistic. It's not, again, 100% realistic, but it just looks a lot more realistic than what we had before. Typically, because I've kind of knocked some of these settings down, I've taken some of my gradations down, I need to kick up my intensities some, okay? Because basically this is just now looking a little bit too dark. Because this is coming from a point, not to drag this out too much further, but even the intensity of it, no light has like a perfectly white intensity or a perfectly like pure intensity. Usually there's some sort of thing that goes into it. The light bulb that's inside here, there's like a filament or a coil or something that's creating that light. There's writing on the light bulb that comes off and gives a different look to it, okay? So there's a number of things that go into making that light that comes out of here look a certain way. I'm just going to jump over. This is just a cool thing just to kind of get an understanding of this. But there are these things called IES profiles. And an IES profile is a light profile. It's a light intensity profile. And manufacturers of light bulbs create these profiles for people to use in architectural things, CG things, so that, you know, as you're creating the look of a room and you want to emulate that room as best as possible, you can use these IES profiles to give that look. So here, this is a great example here. Instead of having just like a solid light, you can see the different kinds of cone angles that are coming off of this. So if I'm doing an architectural rendering and I want to make sure that the sconces or whatever light things, fixtures we have on the wall are going to look the way that they're going to look in the end product, I can go to this website and say, what light bulbs are you using? What fixtures are you using? And I can grab what it's supposed to look like and use that. Okay? So you can go into a crazy amount of detail as to how photorealistic you go with some of this stuff. Okay? Sometimes you're going to be working at a very stylized view of it. Sometimes you're going to need these kinds of things. When we look at anything that ILM does, their biggest accomplishment or their biggest feat is that they go through and they try to figure out the physics behind every single thing that they create. When they made the Iron Man suit for Iron Man, they wanted to make sure that everything could physically work. Now, the only issue they had with the Iron Man suit was that it would all work, but no human being would ever be able to fit inside the Iron Man suit. All right? So again, we could play with these settings for an hour trying to get something really, really cool looking, but again, we're just not going to do that. Okay? We are going to go back in the attribute editor, and we're going to turn on one more thing that you probably didn't even notice, or maybe you did notice. And I'm going to zoom in on my Pacman just so you can see it. All right, what's missing from our picture? A shadow, okay? By default, again, we don't get things like shadows. We want shadows, because right now, I have no idea if Pacman's floating above the ground or if he's on the ground. All right, so in the attribute editor for our light, there's a shadow section, okay? And we're going to go down to where it says use ray trace shadows and just verify that that is definitely clicked, okay? So use ray trace shadows under the shadow section. You have to pop open shadows and then make sure it's there. Yes?
No.
Okay, so we're going light radius of 5, shadow rays to 20. This thing that we turned on, use ray trace shadows, this is something that eats up a lot of memory, eats up a lot of resources, okay? But we're going to turn it on. So we're going to go and close the attribute editor. And the clapper that we clicked to get to the rendering button was right here. Okay, that's the render button. We're going to go 2 down to the one with the dots. Okay, that's render settings. Okay? So basically what this is it tells Maya how do you want to output this, what things do you want to calculate, what's the quality of your rendering, and there's a number of factors that are going to go into that. So we're just going to turn a couple of them on while we're in here. So we're going to start in this common tab and just set this whole thing up for our actual render, and then we'll go back into it if we needed to. So our file name prefix, we're just going to rename this, just delete everything in that file name prefix, and call it Pacman underscore whatever your last name is, and then hit enter. Okay? The image format is Maya IFF. Okay? That's the standard Maya file format. Basically, when we hit the actual render button, it outputs it as an if image. Okay? You can save it as whatever. You could save it as an AVI, you could save it as a JPEG, or whatever. Okay? If's the one we're going to use. Now, because we're rendering out a number of frames, when we render this, we don't get a QuickTime out of here. We get images. We get one image per frame. So we have to tell it down here under this name.extension that we want to use the third one down, which is name.number.extension. Okay, so name.number.extension. So pick that one. And then we're going to scroll down some more. And then the end frame is going to be 120, because that's how many frames we have. We're using our perspective camera, that's fine. Our image size is 960 by 540. Okay? We don't worry about pixels at all, or resolution at all, dots per inch. All we care about is actual pixel count. So we want 960 pixels going wide, 540 pixels going tall. If we were printing something, then we could worry about pixels, but we don't. Or we can worry about the resolution, but we don't. This tab is okay, so we're going to go to the next tab, which is Maya Software. Okay, now under the quality, we're going to set this to production quality. So it says quality, custom. We're going to change custom to production quality. Good, no complaints yet. Ray tracing quality further down. You'll see that ray tracing is turned off here. Okay, now again, this is why, because ray tracing is just something that eats up a lot of memory and resources when we use it. So we're going to click it on. And we're going to turn reflections down to 2. Refractions we can turn off. And shadows will turn to 3. Okay? Now you'll notice these are the 3 big things that ray tracing covers. Reflections, refractions, and shadows. We'll get more into what each one of these are. You already know what reflections are. Light hits a surface and bounces off that surface. A refraction is light hits the surface, bends, goes another direction through the surface, bends, and then comes out the surface. Okay? And then shadows are just shadows. So those are the 3 things that ray tracing does. So if we want to have reflections on something, we have to have ray tracing on. We want refractions, we have to have ray tracing on. There's also other stuff inside here like motion blur we could turn on and whatever else. We're not going to worry about that. So that's all we're going to set. So we can close that. Then if you zoom in on your Pacman and you hit the render button, you should see that Pacman now has a shadow. And you can also see how much longer the rendering is taking. Okay? Because we're so, the settings are up so high that it's going to take longer to render each frame. All right? Now you'll also notice from looking at mine, especially on the projector here, that you can't really see underneath Pacman. If this was the real world, the light would come down, it would hit the ground, it would spread out a little bit and kind of give us a little bit of bounce light illuminating the underside of Pacman. Well, it's not doing that, okay? By default, it doesn't do that. We're not going to do it on this assignment because, again, that would just be something that would add another level of crazy render time to this thing that we don't really care about except for to kind of go through the motions. So we're going to do what's called faking it. So we're going to close our render view. So if you're still rendering, you can hit the escape button, and then it'll stop your rendering, and then you can close it. Then we're going to go to Create, Lights, and we're going to add what's called an ambient light, and it's up top. Okay, Create Lights, Ambient Light. And all I'm going to do is just move the ambient light way above my scene. Okay, like way up high. Okay. An ambient light is basically kind of like if all the lights are off in the room, but you can still kind of see like some illumination there. That's what an ambient light typically gives you. Okay, what does an object look like with the absence of a light? That's the kind of light that this is. So create lights, ambient light, move the ambient light way above the scene, and then under intensity in the channel box, we're just going to set this to 0.1. And then we'll render Pacman out again up close and see if that kind of filled in that gap. If it didn't fill in that gap for us, then we'll take the intensity up a little bit higher. And I think on mine I have to take it up a little bit higher. So right away I kind of know that, so I'm just going to cancel it and put it up a little bit higher. There we go. So now we're getting a little bit more difference. It's hard to see on the projector again, but a little bit more difference between Pacman and the ground. All right, we only have a couple more steps before we kind of wrap up Pacman and get him going for next class. Okay, so our modeling is done, our animation is done, our lighting is done. The next step in this is texturing. Now sometimes you'll actually swap. Sometimes you'll do texturing first and then lighting. Sometimes you do lighting first and then texturing. Sometimes if you're at a big house, there will be people working on textures while you're doing the planning stages of things. Okay, so we're going to go and click on the ground first, and we're going to add a texture or a coloring to the ground. All right, so we click the ground. You can't really see it selected, but if you look at your channel box, you'll see it says NURBS plane 1. We only have one plane in our scene. It's the ground. There's the NURBS plane 1. So then we're going to hold down the space bar. Go to lighting and shading on the bottom left, and then go to assign favorite material blend. Okay. Yep. Bottom left, lighting and shading. Assign new favorite material and blend. Okay. What this does is it assigns a blend to our ground plane and opens up the attribute editor. A blend is simply a definition of what we want this texture to look like, what we want the coloring to look like, okay? So all this is a definition. And we can reference that definition on anything. So I could say, the ground, I want to be wood, and I can assign this definition to anything I want to be the exact same coloring as that, okay? So that's all this is. It's called a shader, but it's all it is just a definition of what it is. So here we can play with the coloring of it. So you can see how I can click and change the color. Wonderful. I can click on the color swatch and I can pick a color that I want for the ground. I could also choose stuff like transparency. We're now making the ground transparent. I could do stuff like ambient color. I could do stuff like incandescence. I could do stuff like whatever. Okay, there's a whole list of things we can play with. So we're going to click on this far right button here next to color, which is like a little checkerboard. Okay, so make sure you go to the end of the color, click on the checkerboard. You're going to get a pop-up, and then from the pop-up, we're going to click on the grid. So it says grid, click on the grid. Okay, so what this is going to do, instead of having a flat color like red, green, blue, whatever, it's going to assign this picture of a grid to our ground plane. Okay, so from here, I'm going to take the filler color and click on it, and choose whatever I want my filler color to be. I like green, so I'm going to choose this kind of green. And then I'm going to go to my line color and choose something maybe a little bit darker like that. Okay? So I've just chosen my filler color and my line color. So choose your filler color and your line color. Okay? You'll also notice, if you haven't already, this is an HSV slider, hue, saturation, and value. I think this is much better than an RGB slider. If you've ever seen an RGB slider, you can switch to it over here. But it's like you're mixing the red, the green, and the blue together to get the color you want. There's also this one, which works the same way.
Oh, I got HSV.
Right, that's what we want. We want HSV. HSV, basically you pick the color. I want blue. Then you can play with the saturation, and then you can play with the value of it. So it makes things a lot easier, especially if you say, I just want to have green, but I want the green to be darker. Or I want this blue, but I want the blue to be brighter, or whatever. So it's a great way to be able to play with these things. The U width, we're going to take down to 0.025. And the V width, 0.025. Okay? These numbers are just arbitrary numbers. They mean nothing to us except that they're just making these things smaller. Okay? Now, if you remember what the image looked like before up here is basically like 4 grids, 4 by 4 grids. That's what would be stretched out over this entire thing. Okay? So it would basically be like 4 big blocks by 4 big blocks. So we want more, more blocks on there. So we're going to go to this other tab, which is Place 2D Texture. And under here, we have repeats. So I know that on my grid, I did 1,000 by 1,000, okay? So I'm going to do like 500 by 500. Okay? I'm going to keep this attribute editor open and just slide it off to my other screen. And then I'm going to hit the render button and see what this looks like.
I need help with my color again.
Do you like the size of your grid? And you'd say, yeah, I like the size of my grid, or I don't like the size of my grid. And then I can come back to this box and say I need more, so I'm going to make these numbers bigger. Okay, so if I want my boxes tinier, I add more. More here, tinier boxes. If I make it less, like I go to 20 and 20, and then I render it out, I'll have bigger boxes because they're being stretched out. It's only repeating 20 units by 20 units. Okay, so it looks ridiculous. Horribly ridiculous. You'll see that everything in here has these little checkerboards. And every time you see a checkerboard, you can map something to it. So I could actually map stuff like, it wouldn't really apply in this one. Let me go back to the grid. I could map a different color to my line color, a different color to my filler color, a different color to my U width and my V width. And that way I can get some variations in there too. So instead of them being like all the same exact green, I could have a mixture of greens inside there. So I'm creating ceramic tiles, and I don't want everything to be the same color. I can do that, all right? So we're going to close that box. And then this is going to be a little bit of a trickier part, is I have to click on all the pieces of Pacman, okay? So watch how I do it. I'll do it a couple times. I'm going to marquee Pacman, okay? So marquee Pacman. Now when we marquee Pacman, we also marqueed the ground and possibly a light or two, okay? So I'm going to hold down the control key and marquee next to Pacman, but not touch Pacman at all. Okay, control is a deselector. So it's going to deselect all the other stuff. To verify that I only have Pacman selected, I'm going to hit F. And if I zoom in on Pacman, I know that I just have Pacman selected. If I had the ground selected also and hit F, you can see what it's going to do. Okay? So we hit F, we zoom in on Pacman, we have Pacman selected. If we have something else, we can hold control and just deselect that other thing and then hit F, and then we get Pacman. All right. So now, again, we hold down the space bar, lighting and shading, assign favorite material, blend. Okay, this is the easy one. We're just going to click on the color and color him yellow, or whatever color you want your Pacman to be. I'll actually go with an opposite of green. I'll go with purple. Wonderful.
Wait.
We're definitely getting a reflection underneath the ground here of Pacman. We can control all of this stuff through the hypershade, through that blend material, or through the attribute editor, through this material here, where we can crank up the reflectivity, pull down reflectivity. Again, we can map stuff because there's a map button right here. We can map something to reflectivity. So if we're doing something like this, where we have this like weird pattern here where it's not like a full reflection, it's like a scratch etched pattern, we could do that too, okay? But again, we're not going to go into crazy details with this one our next assignment we definitely will be going into more detail. All right, so that looks good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to click on this little blue circle right here. See where it says resolution gate under the word renderer? Where's my pointer? There it is. Okay, so we're going to click on that blue circle, and that pops open this box that's called the resolution gate. Okay, this tells Maya, or tells us actually, what is going to render out. Because as kind of like a guide, if I pull this here, it's not going to render vertically, right? Okay, so I have to know what is actually going to be in my camera when I render this thing out. So I click on that blue circle and it tells me what's going to render out. So now what I want to do is kind of fit my Pacman into the scene so it looks good at the beginning and looks good at the end. So here it is at the end. Oops, see, in the beginning he kind of gets cut off, so I'm just going to rotate my camera around. Until he's in there for both parts. Okay? So just play with your camera until he's in the view for the entire thing. Okay? It looks like everyone has a good shot. Let's go to File, Save As. We haven't saved this at all. So had something happened, this would be kaput, and we'd have to start all over again. Okay? So just label it with 02. And then also put inside there, I'm going to put it right after my name, render. Okay? So I enable it new Pacman Sarcona render underscore 02. So anywhere inside the name of it, I don't care where, just add the word render. Okay? And then we're going to go change our, not change that, we're going to go to the hotbox and we're going to go to render, batch render option box. Okay? And this is under the hotbox again, batch render, or render, batch render, the space bar. Yep. So render near the bottom, batch render option box.
Render near the bottom. There it is.
Okay. So what this is going to do, when we hit this button up here at the top, right there, it renders whatever frame we're on, okay? And then it saves it as a temporary file. What we want Maya to do now is go to frame 1, render it out, and then save it. Go to frame 2, render it out, and save it. Go to frame 3 and 4, all the way to 120, okay? So that's what this batch render is going to do, is it goes through our entire frame range and renders all this stuff out. So we just hit batch render and close. And then on the bottom right, next to, you see the key right here, and then right down here is a script editor. So right underneath the key, there's a little box that says script editor. We're going to click that, and then maximize it so we can see it. This is Maya's progress. It's going through each one of our frames. So right now it's on frame 6, because it says 0006.iff. And it's 35, 40%, 50% done with frame 6. So when you get to something that's more complex, stuff that's in the higher range, sometimes this thing will take an hour for one frame. So your progress is going to be like 1% done, 2% done, whatever. So this is just going to chug along. So we don't need to worry about them today, but typically when we're rendering, they moved them back. We would want to put these signs on the computer so that the people coming in know that people are rendering and we don't want to screw with their stuff.
Oh, that's
okay. So, because the computer is basically just chugging along now. Now we want to do one more thing, and then you guys can skedaddle. We're going to right-click down here in the taskbar. See next to this blank area, there's nothing going on. I'm going to right-click and go to Task Manager. Or you can hit Control-Shift-Escape. I think that is the hotkey for it. You'll see that there's in the Processes folder, Processes tab, there's one called Maya Batch, and it's probably going to be the one that's eating up the most processor. That's what the CPU is. Okay? So inside these computers is a bunch of calculators that are doing a bunch of math problems, and that's called the CPU. And right now it's opened a program called Maya Batch. It's chugging along doing some Maya Batch stuff. We're going to right-click on Maya Batch and say Set Priority Below Normal, and then Change. Okay? Now that is a critical thing to do because what it's going to do is the next time someone comes on the computer, if they want to use Photoshop, is we can close Maya down now. So even though it's rendering, I've saved my work. I'm going to save it again. We can close Maya down. There it goes. And you'll see that in mine, if you have closed yours, the Maya batch is still running in the background. Okay? So anytime we're rendering, it actually opens up a brand new program, processes the stuff it needs to do, and there it is. Now the only issue that someone coming in the next class is going to have is they're not going to be able to delete your preferences and copy their own preferences in. But that's no big deal. They can just live without them for today. Okay? So just be aware of that. So if you wanted to, you can back up your preferences. We really didn't change any preferences today, so we don't need to worry about that. And that's it. Okay? So when we come in next time, we're going to actually take our renderings, put it together into a movie, something we could show mom and dad or put on Facebook and tweet about. All right?